All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and begin. I'm going to turn things over right away to Courtney. She's going to give you a sense of what you can expect for today, and then we'll get going.
Good morning, everybody. I'm glad to see your faces, that I'm not looking at the screen to look behind me to see how everybody's doing. So it's nice to see your faces even with masks. So what I wanted to do this morning is just walk through our next two sessions. But first I want to remind everyone, I think I did this in the first meeting, what I think my role in this process is, and it is to protect the process. So I'm here to make sure we get to the end of this in a way that protects both the spirit of the conversations we've been having and reflects the information that's been presented and the responses to it. And while all task force are created in the beginning, once you add 19 people in a controversial community conversation, I believe it's the expectation for us to be adaptive and responsive to both the folks who are willing to serve on the task force and the folks that have a vested interest in the outcome of this process. So a couple of you have taken advantage of offering to expand on what I'll describe as the unease in the room. And it boils down to me to a couple of things. One is, it is clear we don't have a whole lot of time. And I wanted to remind folks that the agreement for the task force was for 8 weeks. And then the city expanded that additional time because we couldn't start it without finding all of you, recruiting all of you, finding folks who would sit in this building in COVID in summer to talk about a controversial issue, to be frank. So with that, I want to make it clear that I am not in a position to change the timeline. So we have 2 meetings left. This is one, and we have one on Monday. I also heard unease on where are we going? How can we consider this a success? What's the outcome? And so what I'm going to propose is a slight change in the plan to both, one, relieve some of the angst in the room. It's a goal, keep that in mind. 2, to lay out a path forward for the next 2 meetings and hope that it feels well to everyone. So I know in the original charge of the task force, it was contemplating that voting would happen. I think given the time constraints we have left and the lack of information and perhaps expertise that folks have, that something about that concept isn't currently sitting right with this task force. So my recommendation is that we move to recommendations. So let's be clear, this task force is not empowered to make decisions on behalf of Interfaith Sanctuary or the city of Boise. So the pressure, I think that some of you have felt that you had to make a decision is not based in the current circumstance. This task force can't make decisions. That's the work of our Planning and Zoning Commission, our City Council, those who are proposing the shelter and others. So I think our best use of time is to use the 2 remaining meetings to focus on recommendations and considerations for the groups associated in the decision-making. And Jen's gonna hand out more information about what I'm talking about so everyone can digest it. Our next steps today are the land scan. So we'll have Maureen and Sam go through the land scan analysis that was part of the task force charge. And then if you're willing to adjust what we're doing into recommendations as per the handout that Jen's handing out, we will spend the time after the land scan going through the process on how to get to best recommendations. But I really, truly don't want to put anyone in a position to vote on things when they don't feel they have enough time, they don't feel they have enough information, it really restricts, I think, some of the creativity that could be brought to this complex and challenging issue. And worse, I think at the end of the day, would ruin what I truly feel is intentional engagement. So I think the neighborhoods in particular gave me insight into, if we just had to say yes or no, that's not the whole picture. So we want to capture the spirit of this conversation, the interests of this group in supporting both those experiencing homelessness and issues with neighborhoods. So those are some of my thoughts behind the proposed document you have received.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through this document so that you have a sense of what to expect for today and for Monday and for this adjustment that we're making. So the deliverable is still going to be a final report. That was always going to be the deliverable. It's just what it contains is different now. The audience for the report is still the mayor and city council. Of course, others will read it, but that's the primary audience. The purpose of that report will be to make recommendations, and we're suggesting that the recommendations be in these 3 areas based on feedback we've received from you and what we've covered in our time together. First would be shelter better practices, sort of a best practices. Here's what you would like to see for emergency shelter. Second, this came through loud and clear from our community partners. You would like there to be a community criteria. And third, it feels as if there's also an opportunity here for you to make recommendations to leadership. So we'll have a chance to talk through those in a little bit. Here's where things get a little sticky for me as a facilitator. Because you're not voting on particular sites, it was like, do we even present the results of the land scan to you? Because that's sort of not what we're doing anymore. But I felt like if I were you, I would want to see that, right? We've been talking about it for 6 weeks now. I would want to see what that looked like, how it was done, and what the results were. And so even though we're not asking you to vote today or even rank sites, I suggested to the city, they agreed that we still present that to you. So that is what you're going to see now. And then after that, after you see the results of that scan, we're going to return back to a workshop mode for the second half of our meeting today, to start to think about filling in these 3 pieces around recommendations for decision makers. And I'll lay out for you how I think that could look for today and for Monday so that we can work efficiently and successfully together. Elaine.
Thank you. I appreciate this. I guess I have a question. Even if we don't make a recommended site recommendation, it seems to me that it would be worthwhile to identify the strengths and weaknesses of the sites that we see based on whatever these criteria are. Is that in the works?
Council President, I think we want to get through the land scan first. You may experience this as we go through the land scan, but I anticipated a whole lot more coming out of that process than we have to present to you. I think the way to handle that is through the land scan. If there are recommendations based on the results of that, we can incorporate that moving forward. But I think you'll see the best use of time is likely not the analysis of the results of the land scan, but we can hold that till we get through the data and then revisit it if you want.
Thank you for that question. And again, I'm not using titles. I apologize. I haven't used titles for anybody. I hope you'll all call me Jen as well. Okay.
Jen, you don't have to.
Okay, good. Thanks, everyone. All right, with that, I believe my job now is to turn things over to our first presenter, which is Sam McCaskill. He is with TOK. That's a company that has helped complete the land scan. Yes? Okay.
How's everyone doing? Good. Alrighty. So I was actually introduced to Interfaith through the city of Boise. I was helping on locate potential properties that had zoning that could flex to be able to. Oh, is that better? So originally I was working with the city of Boise and kind of grow our housing land trust. And so we scanned throughout basically all of city of Boise's impact area. And we were in search of land to be able to do mixed income, low income, a bunch of different housing projects. My goal was to go out, search the projects, everything that we had identified for the most part was all off market property. It was brought that way, both location to services, proximity to public transportation was really one of the main ones, and then conformity to zoning and the surrounding uses. And so we kind of went through all those parameters. That was, I think to date now, it's been 2 years since I was introduced to that project. I had been formerly working with Anna Marie Giles and then Leon Letson and trying to find that. Through that project is how I got introduced to Interfaith and what Jody was searching for expanding her footprint to be able to basically carry out her mission, and that's to serve more people that were in need of services. So we kind of started from scratch. This went into looking first on market for any potential projects or any potential dirt that could fit their property needs. We went through everything, which even at the time was bleak opportunities as far as available properties within the city or close to downtown public transportation to be able to make it seem like it would be a good fit. We went through a ton of properties, the Cabana Inn, Red Lion, the Boise Inn, a bunch of these properties that would have an easy transition over to both the shelter usage and location. In my dealing with a lot of those sellers, they are very difficult. They weren't finding it a compelling reason to sell just because it was Interfaith Sanctuary at that time. It wasn't completely stated of who exactly the buyer was going to be, but just the fact for them of selling those properties. So those are a pretty heavy lift. They're expensive. They're expensive on the remodel. All those inns, they are cut out to be ideal for rooms, but the addition for kitchens and different stuff like that certainly makes it a little bit tougher. So we kind of went through all those properties and really nothing that checked the box, whether it was a seller willing to sell or a property that fit the parameters. From there, it took us to the on-market property, which was the Salvation Army building. We engaged with them. We went through multiple tours, went through with contractors, kind of exercise how the funding would go. We engaged in negotiations with them. It was, I would say, lucky on the timing of when those negotiations took place. It was a point in the market when we saw this 3-month lull due to COVID. And then as we all are experiencing, especially, on the residential side, which has trickled over into the commercial side, once that 3-month lull was over, the market changed completely. Buildings like that building are incredibly tough to find, especially in an area that's close enough to downtown. One of the obvious challenges of the property was its distance from downtown, but being with public transportation and, the goals for State Street, a couple similar projects that are city owned in the area. I think it checked the boxes for interfaith at that time. Since then, and since the task force has been assembled, we've continued to look at opportunities. We've been continuing to search both on and off market. The on market properties are getting even harder to find when they come out. It's gone within the week if it's priced right. And that pricing has gone up substantially since the Salvation Army building was purchased. So I think to provide a picture just of the market and where everything's going, we're battling, with normal investors, normal developers that are coming into this area to develop because Boise's an attractive area to be at. Interfaith Sanctuary is up against those obstacles as well. Plus, they're on sometimes a different budget than what some of these investors and developers are. And so their competitive advantage, they don't get one just because they're a nonprofit. And so that's been something that was difficult in the past and going to be difficult moving forward, and finding something that's easy enough for the occupants to get to. But I think at that point, was there anything else that I should be covering specifically as far as sites that we've looked at?
I think that about does it, Sam. If you all remember, I'm Maureen Brewer, Housing and Community Development Senior Manager. I would just clarify that, as Sam stated, he was brought on by the city of Boise 2 years ago to help us find parcels for the city's housing land trust. And then as we moved into COVID response and we're trying to identify hotels that would be willing to shelter our homeless population during the pandemic, we connected Sam with Interfaith as part of that partnership work on behalf of our Path Home. So unless there are specific questions for Sam, I can show you the results of the most recent land scan that Sam performed for us, inclusive of the suggestions that were submitted to us for sites.
Cool. Yeah, Elaine.
Thanks, Sam. I would like to see that list. A question, I know the financial end of it now is a little trickier. However, the site that Interfaith now owns on State Street is also worth a lot more than it was when they purchased it. And I wonder if, and we have some ARP money that can specifically be used for this kind of thing. And I wonder if we have allowed the financial end of it to limit the look at opportunities, or if you're just saying, if we were to go forward, there would be a lot more complications because of the financial end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think to that, obviously, the financial situation is difficult. I think that actually the hardest part about it is finding a property or a property owner willing to sell that fits the parameters. And so, I think that the search has been very creative, both from office buildings, industrial buildings, multifamily, all the way down to the dirt or site redevelopment of what it could be. And I think that, no doubt the property value for State Street has gone up. There's a lot of demand for buildings like that. And I think that the other parameters for what fits and where it fits are going to be the toughest ones, because I'm anticipating that other neighborhoods around the city would probably react similar to veterans. And so from there, you look to a place that's kind of more centrally surrounded by commercial, or more specifically the downtown area. And some of the dirt prices that we're seeing now, I mean, just the west downtown parcels that went through and got entitled. I mean, those with entitlement plans for apartments tripled, if not quadrupled in value. The symposium site is a small condensed site up against the freeway, and that's listed now at $5 million for an acre. So that's definitely a tough deal.
So with the task force's permission, let me go into what the results of the land scan were, and I'll show you how we filtered that. Because I think, Council President, it will kind of further explain the question you just asked too. Okay, how do you all can see this now? So let me just note here that, and Sam, I think made this clear, but it's probably bears repeating that this list was put together given Sam's scan of the market, and then of course the list of suggestions that you all submitted. Parcels were included on the list if they were on the market, owned by the city, and then we've also included one off-market parcel because it's owned by a public partner. Like Sam said, the inventory is challenging and the market is moving every day. I'm going to share with you first, before I show you on screen, what our filters were. So that the first one that I just described, how parcels moved onto the list, available for purchase, city-owned or partner-owned. And then the next three filters that we used were: one, the location has to be in Boise because that's where the decision-making authority is. Two, and this is important because you're going to see the list move a lot when I show you this filter, but a shelter home is only allowed by conditional use permit, and it's only allowed in 4 of the city's 24 zoning codes. So that significantly decreases where a conditional use permit is allowable and where an emergency shelter can be placed within the city. And then lastly, we filtered by size. So both a 30,000 square foot building, which it sounds like there was general agreement on from the task force, and you'll see the buildings that are for sale are pretty small in the 5,000 square foot range. And then we also went between 1 acre and 3 acre lots. Above 3 acres is not a responsible use of that parcel for shelter. We would prioritize it for housing. So let me show you, there were 56, I believe, different parcels, if you will, that were either for sale or on the market. And so if we go to location, I've kind of flagged in red here what the 3 filters are. So if we go to location and only select Boise, you'll see a few Garden City and Ada County parcels came off the list. We're down to, oh, it's not going to show me because it's going to keep where their rows are, but it collapsed a few of those Garden City and Ada County ones. And then this one's really the biggie. So is it allowed by zoning code? Okay, and then we filtered by size. So you see here, there's some buildings for sale between 5,000 and roughly 10,000 square feet. And then you see the acreage listed here. So does the lot size meet our criteria is essentially what we're looking at here. And we're down to this handful of sites. I will tell you that 2801 Fletcher is already under contract. The town square parcels are already under contract. 300 North Orchard Street or 300 Orchard Street is also under contract. There's a gas station there now, so it would require significant environmental remediation. This is actually what a parcel we looked at for our land trust and decided against for that reason. So what that leaves us with is this ACHD parcel that's right on Front Street. And then this one here, 1250 Vanell, is the same parcel as Overland and Vanell here. That one is kind of tucked behind the Walmart off of Overland, right by the freeway. We don't have a price on it yet, as far as I know, Sam. And it is it's almost a 3 acre site, 2.9 acres.
And for background on the listing, the way that it's put together, that parcel is owned by Walmart. So it's excess ground owned by Walmart that sits back there. It's handled by a national broker through Walmart outside of Seattle. And typically in the market, when we see contact agent for the pricing, it means that the pricing is very extreme and they don't want to put that on. But I've been calling him and emailing him, so I'll be trying to track down the exact pricing expectation on that one.
Thanks, Sam. So I think through the workshop, we will have an opportunity for some questions and answers if questions are sparked for you after seeing this. But I also wanted to introduce my colleague, the Deputy Director of Current Planning, Cody Riddle, just to walk you through in a little more detail what the planning and zoning process looks like and that zoning code.
Thank you. I think when I was asked to speak today, they needed a kind of a zoning nerd to touch on some of this for you. And because Council President Clegg is already on your panel, I think I was the next best thing as it comes to a zoning nerd. But more specific, I was asked to speak as to what this zoning that you saw filtered this list means to this project moving forward. On the most basic sense, zoning regulates the range of uses and physical improvements you can have on a property. Every property in our city has a zone. As Maureen mentioned, we have 24 of them. With each of those, you have a set of dimensional standards, setbacks, heights, things like that. Again, all specified in our development code. It also includes a list of uses that are allowed, prohibited, or conditional in each zone. Your work has obviously focused on a shelter home. And there are only four of our commercial zones where that's conditionally allowed. It's not outright allowed in any zone. So that right off the bat limits the location based on existing zoning to about 7% of the city's zoned land. So I mentioned it's conditionally allowed in the commercial zones. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with what a conditional use permit is, it's a use that has unique characteristics that can only be allowed when after an evaluation by the Planning and Zoning Commission. That process also allows the city to place conditions on that use that ensure compatibility with the surrounding neighborhood and prevent negative impacts or mitigate impacts. Again, all of that only occurs through a public hearing process. That process has very specific and detailed procedures that are also described in the zoning code. Included in that is a timing requirement for each step that an application must go through. That procedural stuff's very boring, but very detailed, but also extremely important, if not the most important thing to what we do. It's important to my team that presents these recommendations to the Planning and Zoning Commission and ultimately City Council. It's extremely important to understand that it's the commission or on an appeal council that makes the decisions. But from our perspective, as long as we meet or exceed those procedural requirements, we've done our job. So timing, which is important to this project, I did want to touch on. A typical conditional use permit from once we accept an application to a public hearing is about 6 to 7 weeks. But there's a couple things that actually have to occur before we even accept that application. That's a pre-application meeting with the planning staff, and then a neighborhood meeting. A neighborhood meeting is required to occur about 2 weeks or at least 2 weeks before we accept an application. And then there's a noticing provision that has to occur before that. Also, the pre-application meeting with the planning staff has to occur before the noticing goes out for that neighborhood meeting. So all of that adds about 2 months to that application timeline we talked about. If you're wondering why I'm sharing that with you today, in the most basic sense, I suppose, time. Not here to advocate any specific location, but just to note, we have a current application, and with that application, those preliminary steps have been met. So if that means the decision to proceed with the hearing on that existing location would actually occur about a month or two before a hearing would occur if a new location is selected. In that scenario, you would have to start from scratch with the pre-application meeting, series of neighborhood meetings and things like that. I think that's what wraps up what I wanted to share in terms of timing and the very basics of a conditional use permit. I brought a handful of documents that goes into all the details on this that you're welcome to take when you leave today. We can also share those documents are available in PDF on our website, and they outline the process that will apply regardless of what site is chosen. Finally, I would just note regardless of where this falls as it proceeds, I've met with a handful of groups to kind of coach them through the hearing process. My team's available to do that regardless of the timing of the hearing or the location that's selected. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Cody. I saw some folks vigorously scribbling, so I know you have questions, but so I'm just going to take us back to that tightrope that we're walking a little bit here, which is that Courtney has strongly recommended that this group not endorse particular sites because there are a lot of technical details at play, including around zoning, including market dynamics. And given the time and the sort of political willingness, expertise on this panel, it's become clear to us that folks are not interested in voting or ranking. But that does not mean that you don't have important work to do. We think you do have important work to do. So I'm going to ask Laura to hand out some supporting materials here, and then I'll walk you through what I think that could look like. What you're about to receive is a draft, capital D draft, of what a final report could contain. And you'll notice that some of it is preloaded. It's preloaded with things like your names and affiliations, what the task force charge was, what the goals of the task force were, et cetera, because that is what would be in a report of this sort. None of that is fixed. You are welcome to provide feedback on anything that you see here. We just wanted to sort of give you a sense of what a final report could look like and what it could contain. If you flip through a few pages, you'll also see some boxes. These are the pieces, and the size of the boxes are not meant to indicate length. They're just sort of placeholders. These are the pieces that I think this group could fill in based on what you've communicated so far. And so what I was going to suggest is for the next 45 minutes or so, you affiliate by group, maybe into 3 groups broadly along these lines, and start to workshop what could go in the report. I would also say these might not be the right headings. Like if you feel like the heading is not quite right or it needs to be tweaked, we can absolutely have that discussion as well. We just wanted to do some pre-work to get you going in terms of helping to load what today and Monday could look like. Does that make sense? Additionally, I know that some of you have questions about the land scan. I know that you have questions about planning and zoning. And so I've asked our presenters to stay in the room. And as you're workshopping, if particular things come up that you'd like answers on, we can certainly get you those answers. Do we need to take like a process moment and talk about this shift? Or do you feel comfortable going into small groups? Raise your hand if you'd like to talk more as a group about the proposed shift. Okay, see a couple of hands. Okay, you have mics in front of you. Can I go ahead and ask you to speak? And introduce yourself if you would at the beginning. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Penny Beach representing hospitals and healthcare clinics. I guess I'm not sure what we're doing anymore, because it seems like with the land scan, there's like two options. There's a Front Street property I have know nothing about, and there's the existing option. So I'm not really sure what our task is anymore.
And so would you not feel comfortable making recommendations for decision makers around best practices for emergency shelter, for example, or here is what you should consider when you think about community engagement or involvement?
I guess I'm comfortable doing that, but I'm just not sure how worthwhile it is.
What the what is?
How worthwhile it is.
How worthwhile it is. Okay. Rabbi Fink. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I should have just called you Dan because I'm not using titles.
Dan is good.
Be consistent.
I would really just mostly echo Dr. Beach's question, which is for me, I'm not really sure what the point is. Vague recommendations don't take us anywhere. They don't give me as an interfaith board member any direction for how we proceed. I don't understand what it gives us and what the point is.
Thank you. I'm going to turn things over to our task force chair.
All I can do is provide my thinking on this. Penny, to your point, we didn't feel that this task force could take those properties and do a thorough investigation of their likelihood to work or not work, because none of you come to this with that sort of experience. I also would encourage everyone to recognize the growing unease associated with this task force in the time frame. So given the time constraints and given the time we have left, we could analyze these properties based on probably limited information in the current marketplace, just because we haven't had these very long. We could put them up against the feasibility, and I think we may find more questions than answers. I guess I'm a little concerned at the implication that recommendations would be a waste of time. I learned some new things just from the city staffing level. I'll pick one example for context. So you heard from our police department that we will respond to emergency calls wherever the shelter is, which is true, we will. But could we look at a process that's better than reactive? So a recommendation from this task force that the city is fully capable of acting on is a consideration of shelter support that has a more proactive policing component, working through all the details, as opposed to planning for coming when a phone call is made. And that's just one of many examples. At least my experience from the city perspective is there has been more information in this space and more considerations. And so the worthwhile use of this task force would be to provide those learnings to the decision makers in this space. But again, I can't make the timeline go any further. I've heard you that you're not comfortable with the information you have in making some of these decisions. And pieces of property are complex. I'm not a zoning nerd, nor do I understand most of this. I do know who does, and it's the folks who actually have the decision-making space in this area. Again, I want to share with you, I have a fantastic staff, a great facilitator. We have arguably 2.5 hours to get from where we are to get to somewhere meaningful. I think Tom said we need to make this count. What I propose to you is a process I think will make this count while respecting everyone in the room and the wishes I heard. I'm not a fan of a prescriptive process that involves people, because people learn things, change things, feel things. And I think this task force needs to adapt to that. But again, those are just some of the thinking behind my recommendations. alternative recommendations are welcome. But we will use most of our time trying to find alternative recommendations for the one meeting we have left. The reason we gave you the report, we were thinking, is to show, at least for me, I need to see the end to know how to get there. So it was helpful for me to look at what we might present to decision makers. But I caution the sentiment that this has been a waste of time. I certainly don't feel that way, and that's not what I've been hearing over the past weeks, 6 weeks, I think.
I also hope that the three buckets, if you will, the three columns that are in that first handout are broad enough that each of you might be able to find a space to say something important to you within those. So I don't want to preload or assume, but Penny and Dan, I could see perhaps that you have some recommendations for leadership that you might want to underscore. You would have to present those to this group on Monday after we do some brainstorming today and get some feedback about how to word those. But I think that's an option.
What leadership? I mean, what leadership are we?
So
talking
we've,
about?
if you look at this handout, the first one we handed out, we've made suggestions. So again, the audience for the report is the mayor and the city council. And so it could be that some of you want to make specific points or messages to them about the selection process or about decision-making moving forward. You could also direct some comments to Interfaith Sanctuary in that spot if you wanted to. You could address the city at large, right? Folks who might face having a similar proposal in their neighborhood. What would you say to them? So we're trying to leave this open now, just giving you suggestions to get thoughts moving. But today and Monday would really be about starting to think about what these would look like, giving you ownership or you having ownership over these pieces. I could see some of you that have expertise in the homelessness and housing space, maybe wanting to focus your efforts around shelter better practices. I don't know. And maybe some of you who are in the community space want to focus in that middle area. Again, I'm not making those assumptions. We're just trying to create large enough buckets that everybody could maybe see themselves saying something meaningful within them. Yes, please. Please introduce yourself first.
I'm Sarah. I'm a local minister. I think the question that I'm wrestling with in thinking about moving forward in this time frame is what happens at the end. So should we be able to put forth some meaningful recommendations? And given what we've heard today about where Interfaith is in the current process of zoning and pre-application for the conditional use permit, what comes next? What are potential outcomes? Where do we go from here?
And by we, do you mean the task force or do you mean we as in sort of Boise?
I think I
decision
mean the
makers?
larger we, because
Yeah.
I think that has implications in terms of what kind of recommendations or what kinds of things we might say to sort of know, like, does Interfaith pick up the process and keep going? Where is the city on that? And I think those are some of the questions that continue to kind of float around in my mind.
Yeah, I don't, and maybe I'll punt to Courtney again here. I don't know that this body can dictate to Interfaith. I know this body cannot dictate to Interfaith what their next steps will be, nor could we dictate to the city, but we certainly could make recommendations. I think Cody outlined the next steps in the zoning process, right? The conditional use permit process. And so, but this is why we didn't want to force you into making a vote or a specific recommendation, was because there is quite a bit of complexity in play. Annie.
You gave me a side eye. I was like, uh-oh.
One more hand.
No, like I'm taking in what everyone's saying, and what I'm hearing from all this is, are we making recommendations?
present their sort of bullet points of what they're proposing be in each section on Monday to the group for feedback. Because we do have to have some sort of process where you as a task force come to some understanding about what you're comfortable saying in the report. And then we will do some work offline to complete the report and then get your written feedback once that's compiled. Okay, so even though we're not meeting anymore after Monday, we will ask you to stay engaged in the preparation of the report online. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah,
Okay.
we get to decide. It's open to what we want to make a recommendation about or for.
Dan?
So I just want to go on record as saying, I think we make a mistake by walking away from unease. I think there's a desire, and I understand it, politically. Nobody wants unease, nobody wants division. But leadership means stepping into the unease and giving us direction.
I think that's exactly right. I think in my conversations with the task force chair and other folks at the city, there is absolutely an expectation that the leaders who are in charge of making this decision are going to have to deal with that discomfort, but that this group might not be the right group for doing that. And that is coming from a number of people in this room who made it very clear that they would not be comfortable with voting. Okay, I'm gonna maybe do one more comment, and then I want to give us some time to actually try this. If it's not working, we'll pivot. We'll try something else. Katie.
I kind of had two questions. One was, does that mean we can only contribute recommendations to one of the three groups individually?
It means for today, you'll probably affiliate with one of those three groups. But again, on Monday, everybody will be providing feedback to whoever presents on what's being proposed for each.
Okay.
And of course, everybody can give feedback on any part of the report at the final stages.
My second question was about the land scan. We heard on Tuesday with the city council work session that the city is considering rezoning some parcels for supportive housing. Is rezoning parcels for shelter off the table, especially city-owned parcels? And was it already filtered by all of the criteria that have been identified?
What I'd like to do is hold on to that question, and Cody's going to stick around, and we'll send him over to you and your group first to answer any specific questions about zoning and about the down select process. But because we're proposing this group now make specific recommendations or vote, I'm going to not address that here. I think our thinking was that that information with the sites would go in as an appendix to this task force report. So that could become, your question could become quite relevant. We'll make sure we get it.
And Jen, quickly, I can just jump in to clarify that our intention before performing the land scan and seeing where it landed with only a couple of sites feasible per zoning code and then size was that we would give you those parcels to sort of discuss and then run through the feasibility criteria. So the only filters that were put on the list are the ones that I walked you through today, the location, the zoning, and the size.
Okay, I'm going to move us to the next piece, understanding there is still some unease and discomfort. We'll be here, we're circulating, we want your feedback. We want to work together collaboratively on getting us where we need to be. So what I'm going to suggest is that if you are interested in working on the shelter better practices piece of the report, that you come up to this side of the table and group together to brainstorm and work on that. If you're interested in the community criteria, we'll put you in the back over here. And then if you want to work on the sort of messages for decision makers, leadership, we'll have you come up to this part of the room. And I realize this is omitting some people who are online, so we'll brainstorm later how best to include them. Okay, so we'll ask you to go ahead and please move around and we'll circulate, get your feedback and tackle your questions. Hey, everybody, I'm just going to interrupt you for 1 minute. We're getting close to the end here. If I can have your attention just for 1 minute, I just need one representative from each group to let me know who the point of contact for your group is. Hillary, if I could just get one representative from each group to let me know who your point of contact is, because we have some people. I'll just come around. All right, everybody, we're at time. Just want to thank you very much for your participation today on behalf of the task force chair, and we will see you on Monday.